Hey guys, it's Jen, and I'm here to share with you 10 tips for stamping and scrapbooking. If you've watched my series on YouTube, this is just kind of a roundup. I'm going to show you all the layouts that I created and then share my tips with you. These will also be over on my blog at CraftyJenSchow.com today. Before I do that, in my very last video, I did a giveaway for a gift certificate to Simon Says Stamp, and so I'm going to announce the winner before I go into my tips for stamping and scrapbooking. So I'm just going to pull my laptop over. I have random.org up. There were 141 applicants, so I just have 141 entered into here, and what I'm going to do is just generate that number and then count down on my list there. So I'll go ahead and generate. The result is number 29. So I'm just going to scroll through the comments and go to number 29. So 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay, so number 29 is Memory Bug. I like several of the techniques you shared, but I think my favorite is how you stamped black words on the black paint on this one. You are the winner. So if you will email me at craftyjenschow@gmail.com, then I'll make sure to get that gift certificate out to you. So now I'm going to go through my layouts and show you 10 tips for stamping and scrapbooking. And like I mentioned, these will be on my blog as well. I'm just going to go through each one. I'll keep them off to the side so we just look at one at a time. So this was the first layout that I created in the series, and my tip for this one is to stamp on patterned paper. When you stamp on patterned paper, it really makes it look like the stamping belongs there. And in this instance, I think it works best when you stamp on kind of a subtle pattern. That way your stamping can really still show up and shine, but it's not too overwhelming. And on this layout, I also stamped on a blank frame, so you can stamp patterns on things, and I use my date stamp quite often as well. So there's a bunch of different stamping techniques, but my idea for this one is to stamp on patterned paper. Okay, idea number 2. Use stamps in place of die cuts or embellishments. So on this layout, this is one of my favorites, just because I love the way that these flowers turned out so much. But this is just a stamp that it's like a multi-layered stamp, and I'm going in order of the layouts of how I created them. So if you want to view any of these layouts, I've linked to the products in the video description for each of these layouts. Just go to the Stamping and Scrapbooking playlist and you'll see them all on there. So this is number 2. But I used a stamp that had layers. So you stamp the background layer and then you stamp another color on top, and it gives this really pretty effect. And so I used those for the flowers and leaves, and then I also stamped on this little camera. And so those are, I've used those as like in place of where I would put die cuts or something like that. I also stamped on vellum on this layout, so that's another idea. I didn't list that as one of my 10 tips, but I love the way that looks. So I stamped and embossed. Regular stamping looks cool too, but the embossing just gives it a little something extra, so that's really cool. So my next idea is to create a shape out of stamped images. So this one was a popular one in the favorites, and what I did was I kind of created a wreath or just a circular shape with some leaves. And you could do all sorts of shapes. I think a heart would be cute, a star would be fun to try. I think basic shapes work best, but you could try anything really. And I just stamped all around in a circle. And that's why it looks like a wreath here because it's leaves, but you could do it with a different shape and it would look different. And then I just watercolored them in, so that was a fun technique to try. So that's my third one. My fourth idea is create an interesting background with a combination of stamps. So I think that this technique, you can see I used a bunch of different stamps on the background here. I used this line stamp, I used some roller stamps and just stamped them several times, some paint splatter stamps. These are some of those roller ones that you actually roll like this. The roller stamp, the kind of roller stamp I used here was one of these where you can change the sentiment and then stamp it. But these ones are actual rollers, so those work really well too. And I used a few different colors here, and I think it works really well when you concentrate it into one area. So you can see I've done a lot of stamping on this background, but I've left this space open, and I think that's important for your eye to be able to have somewhere to rest when you do something kind of busy like that. But I really like the way that this one turned out. So that is my next tip, is use stamps for interesting backgrounds. And small repeated patterns or things like splats and lines work really well for that technique. My next one was this one. This was another favorite of mine, and I think of a lot of you based on the comments that I read. This one is use your stamps for an eye-catching title. And so I really love the way that this title turned out, and I was kind of playing on if you can't tell from reading this, like a Lifetime original movie kind of title here, because I think that I'm trying to be a little bit funny. And so I used 3 different alphabet stamp sets, and I used 2 different colors, so you can use different colors to make them stand out differently. I really like the boldness of this one. There are large alphabet stamps that you can find out there. This is a really old one from Close to My Heart. All 3 of these are from Close to My Heart, actually. And this stamp set's kind of fun because it's actually my handwriting, so that was a fun one to create, and I love creating a bold title with stamp sets. And that's a good way to incorporate stamping into your scrapbooking if you've never, if you haven't done a ton of stamping before, or you're not sure how to incorporate things, a title is a really easy way to do that. So that is my next tip. Number 6 is to stamp with different mediums. So on this layout, I actually colored some stamps with a Tombow brush marker, and then I spritzed it with some water and stamped it down so it looked watercolored. And you can use a variety of different kinds of markers. Distress markers from Tim Holtz work for something like this. You could even put watercolors directly on a stamp and try that. But the idea here is to use some different kinds of things besides just ink pads to stamp with. You could also try spray mists and different stuff like that. So I just stamped the background. I kind of created a diagonal look and mixed orange and pink because I love those colors together, and it really matched my photo well. So that is my next tip, is to stamp with different mediums. Something maybe you haven't thought to stamp with before. Can be fun to try. My next tip is this is kind of two tips in one. This was another favorite of a lot of you, and my stamp here is to cluster your stamps to create an interesting focal point. So in this instance, you can see I've stamped all down the side, and this is kind of in place of, I could have put a piece of patterned paper here, and I do often put a strip of patterned paper on the side of a layout, but instead I used some stamping. So the other idea that I have with this is to stamp in a rainbow, so I think that's another eye-catching look, is to stamp in a rainbow. That's just an interesting look going on. And the other thing that I love is you can see where some of these inks overlap, that you get interesting shades of color, and I really like the way that looks. You can see it in all of these different places where the stamps overlap. I think that looks really cool. So these are all dye inks, which means that they soak into and dye the paper, and so that's how you can get that effect with dye inks. So that is my next tip. Number 7 is cluster your stamps to create an interesting focal point on your layout. My next tip is to create your own patterned paper with stamps. Now this layout has a lot of stamping on it, but what I really wanted to focus on was the fact that you can create your own patterned papers. So this paper right here is just a bunch of, it's actually one stamp, a phrase that says Magic Memories, stamped over and over and over on the background. Just kind of, you could do it in a more clear pattern, but this is just stamped kind of all over the place, and it gives a really cool look, and that kind of those kind of text patterns are pretty popular right now, so that was a fun one to create. And then this paper right here is just a bunch of globes stamped, and I just kind of nestled them all together, and then I hand trimmed around it, but you could leave it as a block too if you wanted. And so the thing that I really wanted to point out on this one is that you can create your own patterns with stamping. The other thing that a lot of you liked, and something that I like doing as well, is to create an ombre kind of title. So I already talked about doing creating titles with stamping, but this one was fun because I inked up the stamp in this light blue, which is Glacier ink from Close to My Heart, and then I inked up the top half of the stamp with Lagoon ink from Close to My Heart, and where they meet, it kind of it fades together, so you get an ombre look with those two colors. And you could do it with more than two colors, but it works great if you have two colors that look nice together. So there is that one. So this one is this tip is create your own pattern paper with stamps, but also try stamping in an ombre fashion. Okay, number 9. Add ink or paint around your stamps using masking fluid to protect the image. So in this one, I just kept, well, at first, I kept my stamping to just this circle right here. And I stamped this scribbly outside, and I stamped pictures and stories on the inside. I covered it with some masking fluid, and I used some masking fluid that I just got at Hobby Lobby, but you can also buy masking fluid pens. And then I painted over the top of it, and then you peel off the masking fluid and this part stays protected underneath. So you can see that this is a little bit lighter, and then I've got all of my paint and ink around the outside. I also did end up stamping a bunch of hearts. This is like, again, creating a pattern, but mostly I wanted to focus on masking for that one. So that's kind of a fun way to do that, and you could do that on a whole background if you wanted to try that. So that is my 9th tip, is to add ink or paint around your stamps using masking fluid to protect the stamped image underneath. And then lastly, this was a technique that I got from Sue's Fish actually, but this one I had a struggle on what to call this technique, but I called it Create a Stamp Explosion. So what I did was I painted with acrylic paint, and then I stamped coming out of the acrylic paint. So it kind of looks like the stamps are exploding out of the paint. And so you just can use any color of paint really, and then just the same ink color to stamp coming out of the paint. And you can see when I turn it in the light, you can see the stamping on top of the paint a little bit, but it really gives this look like it's flowing out of the paint a little bit. So that is my last tip. And if you want to head over to my blog at CraftyJenSchow.com, there I did list a few bonus tips that didn't go along with that they weren't like the main focus of the layouts, but some of the other things I mentioned, like overlapping different colors of inks to create new shades and stuff like that. So be sure to head over to my blog at CraftyJenSchow.com so you can see kind of the roundup. And thank you to all of you who have watched. I've really enjoyed making this video. Next week, I will start with a new series, and I'm going to go with, back before I started this series, I asked my followers to tell me what they would like to see from me, and I gave 2 options: stamping and scrapbooking, or inspiration is everywhere. And stamping and scrapbooking won, but it was pretty split. So my next series is going to be Inspiration is Everywhere, where I will show you how you can find inspiration from nature, from magazines, from like the way a newspaper is laid out, and different things that you might not think of, just to get your mind thinking about what you see in a bit of a different way. So again, thanks so much for watching this series. Head over to my blog for more information, and we'll talk to you very soon. Bye-bye.